Brothers and sisters, I want to, first of all, just express my gratitude to the Cumberland County Progressives and to the Institute for Economic Justice for getting us together and for sponsoring this. And when I came in, I really felt the energy in here and the depth of the discussion. And in that sense, it wasn't superficial. People were grappling after weighty pieces of reality so that we can get our arms around the situation that confronts us. And so I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here. And my task as I read the letter is to share a little more experiential about the on-the-ground work that some of us have done over the years and what it grows out of and how we see it. I think that that part of what the consensus is here is that we are at an enormously significant moment in history. And I want to say a little more about that a little later on. And what that means is that sometimes when you say something or propose something or do something, and it's in a certain context, it means one thing. When you say it in another context, it means something quite different. The unity of black people, Latinos, whites, at this point, means something so profound if we can walk that into being. And so I just want to frame that. I bring you greetings from the church that I pastor, Faith Community Church, and I want to claim the tradition of Christendom that I represent, and I want to struggle that most of it is not reflected in Western culture. I want to just make that point. We understand, I understand faith as a vocation. And it's about not just believing something, but acting on that belief. And in that sense, I would prefer it as a verb. Faith means doing something. And in that sense, it is nurturing our internal self. And when I heard the discussion about all of the dimensions that we'll have to engage, part of it is indeed ourselves. Because we have to grow that core self in ourselves in order for our external selves to be what it ought to be and to do what it ought to do. Because if not, then narrowness, selfishness, the lack of courage, the notion that this body and this little space we have in time is kind of sacredly separated from everything else will make our movement open to manipulation and abuse. And so I just want to say that. I'm also the director of the Beloved Community Center in Greensboro. And that tradition is rooted in the legacy and the work and the life of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And in that regard, I want to say that we try to stand for the dignity and the worth and indeed the enormous unrealized potential of everybody, of all of God's children, bar none. Because I do think that even though humanity is scarred with long, how can we say, epochs of evil and behavior, that within us there is a commonality that has to be fought for and has to be pushed for so that we can move forward together. How we do it is somewhat at issue. And so I want to say that I come standing for the dignity and worth of everyone. I want to say a few words about the period we're in to get started. I'm used to a little lectern here, so this is challenging me, but we'll do what we can do. We're in a rare period. People who are students of capitalism and imperialism are familiar with the cycles. There's a cycle, it comes, it goes. There's a certain amount of destruction, and it readjusts itself, and it starts the same thing over again. And what I want to suggest is that while that's going on, we are involved with something, I think, significantly deeper than that. And when you look at it, just looking at the surface of it, I want to lay out three things. That we are the product of the accumulation of all of these crises. It's not just another one. And when you think of the ecological, environmental, global warming crisis, in which the very way the earth is behaving is being challenged, and the polar caps are melting, and the water is heating up, and hurricanes are turning our cities, are revealing the other sins as it blows in. And I argue that there is a New Orleans in every city. It's just that the storm hadn't hit it fully yet. So if you took the implication of just the global warming piece, it would be an enormous challenge. And we don't know what the disease implications are. We don't know all of these implications that are built into this. It's an enormous challenge. And then in this nation, we are caught up in a military, a war, a security crisis, in which the country is so dedicated to killing folk as a way of life. And you know, once you get on that path, you know, the world has been on it all the time, but it's been spotted. But once you get on into a permanent war culture, you transform the very nature of how people think themselves. Otherwise, they couldn't support that. That thinking has to change to line up with the reality and the set of assumptions that the only way to secure our space in the world is have one war after another war after another war. And we're in that period. We're in a war that we have no business in whatsoever, and we have no way out of it. And so it's a messed up situation. We see our security all tied up with it. And so I want to lay out that that's another dimension of the current crisis. And if we look at this finance, this economic, this debt crisis, which is off the chart in terms of all of the things that our brothers and sisters have shared. And what we find is that they aren't separated from each other, that they fold into each other. Each one folds into the other one. The military crisis folds into the economic crisis, and the global warming crisis folds into the military. It's all tied together. And so in that sense, I want to suggest to you that we're not so much dealing with a normal cycle. And I've heard some people compare it this way. They've said that this looks less like a cycle within an epoch and the change of the epoch itself. For example, the magnitude of it need be compared to the change from agriculture to industry, where all of the assumptions that were under play in agriculture are themselves challenged, because the whole thing is beginning to go over and morph over into something else for which we have no experience. And it took 100 years to figure out what that was. And I want to invite you to think a little bit like that, because otherwise I think we'll just be trapped into some ways of thinking that may not be that helpful. Having said that, I want to, the implications of this is that when you have this kind of tsunami type thing or seismic shift, it unleashes an enormous amount of energy. And I'm going to use the term energy because it's a little easier to talk about it that way. And so you have a whole nation of people. I was listening this morning where it says 75% of the people are not agreeing with anybody, that they are angry They are frustrated, they are upset, and they are frightened. And when you have angry, upset, frustrated, frightened people, you have a dangerous situation on your hand because it's not clear where they are going to go. But you also have a beautiful situation on your hand because there once was a time people said that everyone is apathetic. Well, that's not the case anymore. There's an enormous release of energy, and the issue, one of the issues before us is how do we organize ourselves in order to catch that wind, and it blows us to somewhere other than the places we're familiar with going. So there is a great opportunity, and there is a great danger. I come out of a tradition of community building, and I want to use that because I think framing something and naming something are very important. How do we frame this thing? And I want to, without pretending to be able to analyze the whole situation, I'm just sharing my perspective on it as I have lived it and as I see it. And when I talk about community, I'm talking about a notion of wholeness and completeness and interrelatedness. That's what community means to me. It is, in my own way of thinking, anchored in some assumptions that we humans have the capacity to be community. Otherwise, it's no point in struggling for it if I didn't believe we had the capacity to be that. And that means transcending every obstacle that would make us not be community. And so I bring that this morning, and it starts with a stand. When you want to build community, you have to find some place to stand. And I want to suggest some features of community buildings and then talk about what we've done. I want to suggest that we have to stand with the most marginalized, the most abused, the most downtrodden, the most dismissed. And if I were using our book of faith, it would sound like the least, the lost, the lame, the leper, the beaten up, those who pushed to the side of the road and into the ditches of death. And so there's a language out here now called the middle class because the people I'm talking about are not included in that discussion. And so I want to say that that's where you stand in order to build community. And then you stand there not just in a way to denounce and damn everybody else, but you stand there trying to figure out and on the assumption that you're trying to stand with the least, but stand for the interests of everyone, even if they disagree with your understanding of what their interests are. That's where you have to stand, and that gives you a place to begin to work for a community. I want you to track with me a little bit here, and I think a feature of this requires humility, because the assumption might be that many of us know what we are doing and that we know how to solve this problem. And I've been around long enough, I'm 65 years old, that I've met so many people who knew how to solve the problem years ago. And yet the problem is deeper and more profound and more devastating than we have ever experienced. And so I have the good sense to dismiss that and know that we are on a road of discovering something. And I want to say that requires a little bit of humility. And humility means the capacity to listen if you're going to build community. Because in folk is something. And to hear the substance of people's hearts and to work with that in such a way that you walk people out of the darkness of separation and into the possibility of being in a meaningful relationship is the very foundation of community work. And so I just want to say that another feature of it is, and I've said this in different ways, interrelatedness. I've been doing some work with the migrant workers, Brother Baldamar Velasquez. And he called me this summer and said that I've never organized folk that I've not spent time doing what they do. And I said, well, that makes you a good organizer. And he said, so I'm going to organize the tobacco farmers, but I've never worked in tobacco. I don't even know what it's like. He said, so I'm going down to some place called Dell, North Carolina, and I'm going to work in the tobacco fields for a whole week. And I told him, I've been in tobacco fields. I don't know if you're going to make it a week at your age. But he went there. And there he was in that tobacco field. And when you get down low, getting those lugs, the temperature gets up to 100 degrees down there. And that's gritty and wet sometimes in the morning. And I came out, I found my way over there. And I got to the field. Somebody met me in a parking lot and took me back in the woods. And he asked me to pray with Mexican workers. And so I was standing there praying. And when I finished, somebody said, "Amen," in Southern English. And I knew it wasn't the Mexican workers. And when I looked behind me, it was the farmer who owned the farm, who had come out and caught us in a prayer meeting out there in his tobacco field. And at that moment, I felt that he was getting ready to come down on all of us who were out there. But we started a conversation. He had some water that he brought out there. And I just want to share this because I want to share that we have to seek new ways of being in relationship. And when I started talking to him, he said that he had a case of it with Reynolds Tobacco Company because they locked them into contracts, and those contracts are so hard and restrictive that he said that I might be open to joining with the workers in order to get my contract straightened out, because this period has created a whole new possibility of alignments. And if you are not open to that, if you just see this guy as the enemy, and you come out there, and even if he's not acting like the enemy, you'll make him the enemy anyhow because you bring that to the conversation, then I think that we're thinking about another period. I hope you're tracking with me a little bit here in terms of being open to something. And that has to do with creativity. That I want to suggest to you that yesterday's thinking and yesterday's analysis, while it has applicability, you can't transport that wholesale into the current moment because it requires us to be creative and to put together the pieces of analysis that we are making in ways that might suggest a direction that we've not yet even conceptualized. And so I just want to say these things to you as someone who's been out here doing community organizing. Now, having said that, as somebody in a city and in a state whose work has been organizing, I see several priorities, and I want to name them. One is I think it is strategic for us to build black-brown unity. Two, I think that any people where 1/4 of your people are tied up in a slave system, in a criminal justice system, and you can go to any court on any Monday morning and see hundreds of beautiful young black people, 7 or 8 generations down from slavery, standing there, getting prepared to be loaded on a bus and taken off to a modern-day slave camp. Youth have to be a priority. And all of this discussion about a gang and gangs and so forth has to be reassessed. And we have to figure out how to engage that. And third, I think that there is something deeply flawed in the makeup of those who have been reared in the United States. And now I don't want to exempt the rest of the world, but somebody else has to speak on that. I have authority in terms of the United States because I have seen the madness that's been carried out and normalized after a while. And so people who steal other people's land. Somebody said, we didn't cross the border crossed us. And take that land. And people who would take the Native American people and take their land and culture and then to put them on reservations and march them as they did, and what do they call it, the March of Trail of Tears, off to some distant cold place where 1/4 of their people die, and yet these folks think that there is something special about them ordained by God. When you start to think that way, you're a dangerous person. When you set the son of slavery and sent him into the United Nations, and he is not just a general, he's standing on the authority of a whole enslaved people. That's why the world listened to him a little bit. And he went there, and I want to be right with this brother. I mean, I want to help me, Holy Ghost. he bartered away years of slavery. Because that's the power he had. It wasn't that he was a general. There are plenty of generals. It wasn't that he was the Secretary of State. He was a black man tied to slavery. And that unearned suffering, and if it be true, as Dr. King said, that unearned suffering has power itself, there's a redemptiveness to it. Nobody else could stroll into the United Nations and make the claim that he made and get some kind of listening, some kind of audience for it. And so I'm saying that that reflects something about us that we need to attend to. And it's white people, black people, it's all of us. And so I want to say that when we were murdered in Greensboro, and then that community, I wouldn't say it to you if it weren't true, was able to see people shot down in broad daylight with a parade permit, with the police gone to lunch. And how do you convince a community like that that what you saw you really didn't see? That something else altogether happened, and then exempt all of the shooters and let them walk free. And to put, at one point, the Klan was in jail on the $50,000 bond, and I, who shot nobody, hit nobody, was myself stabbed, was put in jail under a $115,000 bond. That reflects a collective mentality of a people. And when you can push people into that direction in one city, you've got the possibility of pushing them in that direction in the whole nation. And so don't you see the need for the internal work? The work of actually facing our deceptive, lying history that gives us a false sense of who we are. I think that that's a priority in the work that we do. And of course, all of that attaches itself to economic justice. And just let me say a word about building a youth movement. You know, sometimes you just have to do things differently. We have an open table, and every Wednesday, anybody in the community who wants to come can come and say anything you want to say, and you won't get thrown out. You'll even get listened to. So this brother strolled in one day and said that my name is King J, and I'm the inker of the almighty Latin king and queen nation. I had never heard of the almighty Latin king and queen nation, and I didn't have a clue what inca meant. He said that I have 500 nation members. They understood as a gang, all over North Carolina. And he came in and said, I'm tired of listening to this discussion about how mean and bad and evil we are. He said, I want to stand for peace. And so I said, beautiful. I want you to stand for peace. That night I got a call from him, and he said that I need spiritual counseling. I was totally surprised. And so it was about 11:30. So I said, can this wait till tomorrow? He said, really, if you could, I'd like to talk tonight. And so I asked him to meet me at the church, and he came over. And he said that the police have been going around to people on their jobs who are part of my organization and saying that they have a parade, they have a warrant for my arrest. And they have gone to homes of people. Now you have to imagine what a Latino brother or sister feels like with the police coming to their home and coming on their jobs. That's a threat built into that, just to have them around like that. And so I asked him, why are they doing it? And he said, because I announced in the Spanish paper what I said in your meeting today. And ever since then, they've been lined up against me. And so I said, what is the charge? They said that I'm charged with communicating a threat to a police officer. And so I said, well, did you? He said, no, I really didn't. And we talked about it. I'll spare you the details. But we agreed. I said, well, why is it so urgent? He said, because I have 2 little girls. Most people don't realize. And I don't want these people coming and kicking my door in the middle of the night. So I didn't exactly know what to do, which is not unusual. But we thought about it together. And we concluded, why don't we go to them? Okay, it's midnight. Let's go down there and ask them to serve the warrant. I have enough standing around here. I can get a bondsman to get you out. And so we went down, and they searched the record. There was no warrant. It didn't exist. And day after day, people in this group were beat up, where they were arrested, they were maligned and mistreated. And so that was the opportunity to stand with them. And at the point that somebody else is abused and mistreated, that's the most important time to stand with them. And by the way, it's the most difficult time. It's easy to stand with somebody in an intellectual discussion. It's easy to stand with people when they are doing all right and nobody, but when somebody has decided that they are going to demonize somebody and that they are going to use them as justification to turn black groups, youth groups against Latino groups and black people against Latino people, you have to stand with them. And when I stood with them, I invited them to come to church. And then my members called me into session to give an explanation. And of course, I was ready to give one, because there's something in our faith that says that you ought to stand with people like this, and people are going to be demonized. And why would they catch the leader of our faith and catch him at midnight and put him on trial before daylight and lynch him before the end of the next day? I said, that's the tradition that you stand in. And so what I'm saying to you, that's what they're doing to them now. And I want to go ahead and draw this out. It actually has led to a flurry of activity and meetings at A&T. And A&T is, whoever is an Aggie in here is rumbling again. And they were over there the other night. And now I met with the agricultural department over there. They have no work. They're putting them out of their job. They want to work. And they're putting out of jobs. And black folk don't have any work. And so we met with the ag department. And now we have a plan to take that land at A&T, which is out there on their farm, and to actually begin to grow some stuff. And so you've got preachers, gang members, black gang members, and university professors getting ready to enter into a collective enterprise to grow some crops on that ground and to sell it and to do something creative. Now, it's not the solution to everything, but it's an opening that came because we were open to an opening. And I want to say that that's what I think we have to at least be open to. Let me just say, finally, that, that we're in electoral campaign, and I would not be faithful to my own beliefs if I didn't have some words to say about it. Our dear brother, Barack Obama, I have enormous respect for him, and I have a bit of sympathy for the predicament that he's in, because you know and I know that he cannot, nor can the Democratic Party, nor can the ruling class that it represents, solve the enormity of this problem that we're faced with. And yet it is a right thing and a courageous thing to do, to run for the President of the United States. Somebody said they stood in the line, they were number 28. We fought for Sunday voting, thought that this would be a day that we could get in and get out. And I stood in the line for 2 hours and 10 minutes because there was something in people called hope, something in people called believing beyond myself. I was standing with a homeless guy. I knew him. And he had never voted in his life. He was 46 years old. And I asked him, I said, well, when you finish voting, and if he wins, how do you think this will translate in terms of whether you'll get a house or get a job? He said, I don't know. He said, but there's something in me that says that I have never voted and I want to vote because he's a black man. And that's powerful and beautiful and dangerous. It's all of that, isn't it? Can we be candid here today? And so we all went in and voted. And what I see here is an enormously important moment. But let's play with two scenarios. Let's play with one scenario in which Obama is elected, and there is no powerful movement built, no capacity to dismantle the apparatus itself that out of which this debt grows and out of which all of these other things grow, and that he struggles through another 4 years, and things don't get any better. Let's say they don't get terribly worse, but they are getting worse, and who knows how terribly worse it might get. What I see there is a trip in which people would say, we have tried the liberals. We have tried the liberal of liberals. We've tried a black liberal. And the situation and how easy it will be to blame. What a time for a black man to be president, when the place is melting, literally melting, and the economy is melting, and all of these things are happening. Now it's time for a black man to be president. And if he doesn't come through, you know, and I know, the culture of blaming will unleash itself in a massive way. And what that actually will look like is that those who run the economy now, or trying to run it, will say, we've tried all of that, and what we have to do is, it will be, what do they call it, a backlash, in which the most reactionary, the most anti-human, the most war-prone will rise to power. And if we think that this Patriot Act and these other things are a problem, I think it will be magnified tenfold. That's what this moment suggests. That's the danger in it. But actually, there's never a big danger without the other side of the coin. And that's a big opportunity. They are linked together. Whenever you see one, the other one is there. And so after the election will be much more important than the election, because then we have to build a movement from the bottom up and the top down at the same time. We have to link up the Latinos and the blacks, and the homeless and the college professors and all of them, and we have to do a level of education. We have to turn the whole nation into a schoolroom. And the schoolroom has to be the streets and the fields and the university and all of that. That's the kind of movement that has to be built. And if we don't build it, we will suffer the consequences of it. And that movement, you know, I used to think the Federal Reserve had something to do with the federal government substantially. It actually is a name. It's 5 banks. and Greenspan and or whoever replaced him, just inventing money out of thin air. On the other side of this so-called money, which is nothing but paper notes circling around through banks and in computers and so forth, are no goods and services that correspond to it. And it drug all of the people into this misery and pain as a few people are wallowing in the obscenity of their wealth. And I want to say to you that that is criminal behavior. That's criminal behavior. When one CEO can get 500 times as much in salary, not even to start with wealth, as a worker. I get $1, you get 500. And so what I'm saying is that is not just an aberration of personalities, that the space is there to create the derivatives and the short sales and all the other instruments that are needed. It's built into that system, and that's what has to get dismantled. And I would suggest to you, why isn't the government the printer of money? That's what Abraham Lincoln did after the Civil War. He said, I want money to fight the war. They said, we're not going to give it to you. He said, that's all right. I will print the money, and I got the army to stand behind my money. And that's actually what a government ought to be doing. Why is the government paying interest on money? Why is it doing that? And who is it paying the interest to? If the government printed its own money, and the money were balanced with the needs of real expansion and real production, and to stay with that 2% that Chip Smith talked about, we're financing now, which is nothing but gambling games in which money is going around in circles, and illusion that people are getting something when they're getting themselves deeper and deeper into it. All of that has to get understood. And I just started looking at it in the last 6 months. Because the thing, and right now, when you get in a period like this, people have ears to hear and eyes to see that they didn't have yesterday. And so people are open to trying to understand this thing now. And so you and I, have to build this marvelous and beautiful unity. It will be challenging. But I want to suggest to you that if at the center of it is what I call love, and you might call it something else, it's the notion that we all belong to each other, that we are all interconnected and interrelated. And there is a substance about us that yearns and pushes out for the better, even when it's surrounded by powers and principalities and darkness in high places. There's still a push for it. I don't know how to explain it. Some say it's the Imago Dei. It's the way in which we were structured. And I like that statement that King made when he suggested that the universe is structured that way. He said that it's all of what you see it, and it's bad. He said the arc of the moral universe is long and torturous and difficult, but at the end of the day, that arc bends toward justice. If we believe that, then we can stay on the battlefield against all of the, I don't want to demonize the sister, Sarah Palin type things, and to build this movement. Beloved, I think that we have now one of the most exciting and decisive moments. It goes by the 60s like a jet plane goes by a bus. Now that the 60s pales in comparison to what this is. And as descendants of slaves, located in the center of this republic, which arguably now has the greatest influence on the world than any other nation. And we have arguably, potentially, the greatest influence on this nation. You see how you're socially located? I end with this. There is a story I like to tell about the power of black spirituality. And that is that in the middle of the Cold War, or in the early phases of the Cold War, when first strike capacity or first strike doctrine developed, in other words, we'll drop the bomb on you if we think you're going to drop it on us. And Bush actually got to that. You know, we'll start war with you if we think you're going to start. And so that developed. And in the middle of this period, in a mean lynch-oriented South, King and others lifted up a voice and unleashed a beautiful spirit that started to blow across the land. And that spirit beckoned all people to come together. They put King in jail, I think it was in Albany, I'm not sure. But Kennedy called his wife, Mrs. King, and said some kind words. And black people just flowed to the polls, voting for Kennedy in wave upon wave. And the margin of difference between Kennedy getting elected and Nixon getting elected really was black people. That was the margin of difference. I have often wondered, I was in the military in 1962 in the Cuban Missile Crisis. We were in a little coal hole out there in Massachusetts as the bombs were being uploaded on the B-52s. And this thing had gotten down to, it starts with Defense Condition 5, DEFCON, and it keeps dropping until it gets down to Defense Condition 1, is it? Which means that war is imminent. Chrome domes are flying, ships are steaming toward each other, and the advice that Kennedy got from some was to go ahead and pull the trigger, because we cannot run the risk of them doing it first. And he hesitated on that. And I have often wondered what might have been the difference if Nixon had been sitting at that table. I've often wondered. And what I want to suggest to you is that that's the power of your slave parents and father. That's the unearned suffering that propel a spirit to flow across this land and to push a young president who didn't know what he was doing. And Khrushchev almost tricked him, pushed him into office, but that wind was behind his back, and there was enough hesitation, just enough, not to push that button, and gave you and I a little bit more time to do the work that we are supposed to do. And if we begin to get up beside history closely and see it, and see the significance of what we've already done with all of our weaknesses and flaws, I think it will energize us, how shall we say, to run on and see what the end will be.